great day as we're having here in Pennsylvania, where we got some beautiful weather and cherry blossoms. I hope everyone's got nice locally good weather, or at least a locally good mood today. We'll get started here in another minute. We still got quite a number of people joining every couple seconds, and we will get started. And just so people are aware, the live stream for this has started. So this is being simulcast, I guess, to, if we can use that term, to YouTube. And we will then have a recording on YouTube of this presentation if you'd like to share it to your friends and colleagues afterwards. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We're at 11:02, so we're going to start getting started. Some notes: we will be doing Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions that can be delayed, please put them in the Q&A chat box, which should be available to you via the Zoom UI. And we will get to them at the end of the presentation. However, if at any point during the presentation there's something you didn't hear or something that you kind of need immediately clarified, I will be monitoring the chat. My colleague Neve will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. Please feel free to say, like, if anything needs to be repeated. We will pass that along to the presenters. With that, welcome to the Finos Open Source in Finance webinar series for April 23rd. We are joined by Turntable, who will be presenting on Woodchip. And very excited today. Turntable has been a phenomenal partner of Finos for my time that I've been, for the last year that I've been working in the Finos community, have really done a lot in promoting ambassador events, leading community dinners, really just engaging across a wide number of projects. I've been excited to see their work on the Common Architectural Language Model, on Morpheer, on TraderX, on integrating a couple of these different projects together, which are the projects that I am most familiar with. I'm really excited today because I don't often work with Git proxy, and I don't know much about Git proxy. So we're going to learn, we as a community are going to learn a little bit more about Git proxy, and then how it can be actually implemented and used and operationalized in production environments. This team has been incredibly formative in getting this very core project up and running since the beginning. So with that, very excited to announce we got Sam Morehouse, CEO, Nick Black, Chief Product Officer, and Gideon Awute, who is Engineering Team Lead. And they will be, I'm going to hand it over to them now.
Thank you, Carl, so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be here today to introduce Woodchip to you, the first product that we've released from Turntable. But firstly, I want to say a little bit about Turntable as a business and where we came from and how we've been working with Finos for the past few years now. So I founded Turntable at the end of 2019, which many of you will remember as like the last of the good years before COVID. Brilliant time to start a business. Turntable is a software development agency, and we are based primarily in Ghana in West Africa, with a bunch of leadership and support in London in the UK. We have a fairly vast and intensive graduate training program that all of our new hires go through. And we've been around for 5 years now, so we're about to start our 8th cohort of graduate hiring and training. So we're looking forward to that. As a software development agency, we work closely with partners in financial services, including a bunch of Finos members, and we work with them on their software development projects. So line of business applications and AI and automation and cloud migration and DevOps and QA and all of that good stuff. On the side, we also build a bunch of products, and that's where Woodchip has come from. And briefly, the story there is we'll talk about Git proxy today by way of introducing Woodchip, but Git proxy is a tool that allows organizations to set rules around the nature of contributions that their engineers make to open source projects. So if you are a developer that's worked in a bank and you've tried to make a code contribution to an open source project, you might have found that that's been challenging for various reasons. That it might have ground your gears a little bit. On the flip side, if you're a person who's responsible for open source contribution governance, you might have had some sleepless nights worrying about data leakage and reputational risk. And Git proxy is a phenomenal open source tool, which is a Finos project, which has been designed and built to help solve those problems. And so as a software development agency, as a software company, I wanted us to use Git proxy to help us manage and put audit and compliance and some logging and tracing around our external contributions. So all the code contributions that went outside of Turntable. And so we started to use Git proxy. And then we put a UI on it. And then we hosted it. We've got this great thing inside our network that allows us to loop in an EC2 box from Amazon. It looks like a dev box on our network. It's a phenomenal tool. We hosted it there. And because we were using Git proxy in our own organization, we were able to capture people's GitHub credentials and use the GitHub API on their behalf. And so we extended the rule set that Git proxy provides. And a hop, skip, and a jump later, we realized that what we had was actually a really, really good product. We have been and continue to make contributions back to the Git proxy code base. So we upstream a bunch of the changes that we make for Woodchip, and we've, I think, been a useful and important member of the community. What we're here to talk about today is some of the rationale behind building a product like this, some of the conversations that we've had with our customers and friends in the financial services industry about the challenges that they face, some code contributors through to information security folks, through to the people that manage governance for large organizations. And we're going to introduce and show you our product, Woodchip. So I'm going to sign off just now and hand you over to Gideon and Nick to introduce themselves, and you'll hear back from me when it's time to do a demo.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Gideon Aite, and I'm an engineering team lead at Turntable, and also a contributor to Finos' Git proxy project. Okay, so I'll hand over to Nick to also introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick. I'm the Chief Product Officer, and I'm going to walk you through today some of the things we've learned whilst going out and talking to early users and potential users within the financial services space. Very, very briefly on me. So I've been building tech products for the last 20 years and dipping in and out of open source over that period. I was one of the early board members at OpenStreetMap, which is the only open source maps project in the world. And, have been, part of being the corporate sponsor for different projects within various startups and bigger organizations. So I've sort of been there as a user, as a keen evangelist, and felt some of the pain, both from my development teams as a head of product, and also from the business side on compliance as well. So really excited to be here sharing what we've been doing in Woodchip today. And without further ado, let me talk a bit about some of the background. So this is the space that we see that really, for various reasons, organizations in financial services want to contribute to open source. Some that we've talked to, for some, it's a genuine philosophical belief that open source is the best way of doing things. For others, it's because their developers want to work on open source projects and it's part of developer experience. And for many, it's as simple as saying, look, why would we fork a project and create our own fork when if we can just push the changes that we want into that project, we benefit from the whole community contributions. So we're all here on this call together. I'm not selling the benefits of open source to you, but that's the sort of world that we see, a strong desire to be working on open source projects. Now, two things get in the way of that. The first is the IP and compliance risks. There are, of course, a need to know which projects are being contributed to. What are the licenses? Could the license change? And then from not make it from an IP risk point of view, what happens if we commit IP that we weren't supposed to commit to that project? Can we get it back? Well, no, you can't. So it's really not as simple, right? So what happens is when an organization wants to start contributing to open source, they end up going through quite a long compliance process that can be In the words of, someone I interviewed recently, 12 months of compliance, and then they never set up the OSPO because it got far too difficult. We think that that's a big shame because there's so much good that could be done. There's so much better development that could be done. Now, often what happens in the, from what we've been hearing is that when these OSPOs are set up, when the policy is put in place, often it can lead to these really clunky bottlenecks and, these sort of bottlenecks and clunky workarounds within the developer experience. So that could be having one designated laptop that is allowed to push changes to GitHub. That could be needing to email all code changes via the manager. There's a lot of workarounds, and many of them just really slow down the development process, which is not good. We want to be building things fast. So Git proxy, the open source tool that we've been contributing to, many of you may have been contributing to, it's one of the solutions to that. Now, as Sam mentioned, as we started to operationalize Git proxy in our environment at Turntable, we started to see a few enhancements that we wanted to make. And we're very excited to be here today talking about how we've spun out those enhancements into their own product, a product that sits on top of Git proxy, using that as the basis and adds a whole bunch of additional functionality. So I'm going to talk about both of those today, and I'm going to try and really clearly signpost which one I'm talking about to avoid any confusion. So first on Git proxy. Git proxy is a Finos project that is there to enable open source collaboration. The main part of that being making changes to open source projects, so pushing your code changes into an open source project whilst maintaining your compliance with your organizational policies. So it's a proxy that sits there as an intermediary between your developers, you, and then the remote repository, and it checks for a few things. So it sits there inside the developer workflow. So when using Git proxy, you're using native Git commands. So you have to set it up. When it's set up, you're just doing your Git add, your Git commit, and so on, which Gideon is going to show later. And it sits there in the background and it enforces policies. It does various things to stop IP leakage, and it is extremely flexible to configure. So lots and lots of configurations options. So what we've done is we've been leveraging those benefits to package up all of this goodness into a package that is very fast to get up and running with. And that's what we're going to show you a demo of today. Before we dive into this demo, I'm the product guy, right? So I get to go out and do the interviews, and I've been talking with OSPO heads, I've been talking with CTOs, VPs, all across financial services to really understand what's going on here. What's the need for open source contributions, and what are the blockers? And I can sort of summarize those hundreds of hours of interviews here for you, which is the current state of OSPO compliance is firstly a lot of manual approval overload. So what I kept hearing again and again from OSPO heads is each commit requires separate clearance. So even working with Git proxy today, there's quite a sort of manual backlog of commits that you have to go through and check that each one is okay. You've then got quite a lot of time-consuming configuration. So parts of setting up an OSPO policies is having to sort of figure it all out for yourself. And there's a lot of cat herding that has to be done there, because you may have one or two representatives from IT development. You're going to have security people, legal, compliance. And without a template, without a sort of understanding of what is the template of the thing we're building, that process of simply getting your system set up and configured can take months and months and months. So it's this classic thing we see a lot, very powerful, flexible tools. The problem with those are you can literally do anything with them. So one of the things we're going to show you is how inside Woodchip, we've taken that sort of powerful flexibility of text-based configuration, and we've turned it into a graphical user interface, which can be understood not only by the techies and the IT team like us, but can be understood by legal and compliance, and sort of speaks their language. And finally, there's quite a few gaps out there which we started to hear about. Things like IP leaking and attachments. Okay, anybody who's brave enough to admit this would probably have done this, where you sort of do a git add and you accidentally attach all kinds of files as file types that you forgot to put in your git ignore, and then you get into trouble. So we've got some solutions for that. You've also then got what happens outside of Git, right? So Git as a product pushing changes up into GitHub. The GitHub part of that has pull request comments, for example. They sit outside of that Git workflow in that sort of that basic CLI command line workflow. That's something we're keenly aware of, and we have a bunch of features we're developing that will be able to track what's going on when it comes to the comment space as well. Because what we keep hearing again and again from OSPO heads and senior engineering leaders is that they want a full audit trail. You know, they want to see everything that's going on, not only what's going on inside the code base. So when I sort of push people on what's the priority, why is this being done now, what we tend to hear about is this big challenge between compliance and developer experience, right? If all we were trying to do was be compliant, it would be really easy. And if all we were trying to do was give our developers an amazing experience and make it really easy for them, it would be really easy. But we're trying to balance these two things. So you've got one challenge, which is that a single slip up can expose your company, right? So this could be as simple as integrating libraries that have the wrong kind of content in them, or it can be, in the case we're looking at here, making a single comment on a inside a code base or in a pull request comment there's then an indelible record of that on GitHub, right? You can't delete that. Your developer says something they shouldn't have done, that's out there in the public. There's then this sort of chaos that we kept hearing about of how you do the approval workflows, that when your open source program works and you get lots of developers contributing, that creates this nightmare bottleneck for the person sitting at the top of that pyramid, who now has to check all of those contributions coming through that are going out to these third-party projects. That then creates a natural tension between the business unit that, you know, it understands the benefit of open source, but they're not really there to do open source. They're there to get the business done, and the parts of the organization which are promoting open source, right? So we've tried to address that by really slimming down the amount of work that needs to be done and taking away, in most cases, any manual approval. And then there's just the huge opportunity cost, which comes with, you know, wrestling compliance, having all those people, the 12 months of having a bunch of your people involved in putting this together, rather than have them work on innovation. So we tend to hear these things come up again and again. So what I'm going to do without much further ado is hand over to Gideon and Sam to show you Woodchip. I want to just signpost some of the things you're going to see. You're going to see, firstly, a SaaS-based interface that makes it very easy to set up Woodchip. You're going to see the user interface, which has been designed not only for the developers, but for the OSPO heads, right? For your compliance people to be able to look at and understand the UI, rather than needing to go through legal documents or, heaven forbid, look at the text-based configuration. We're going to talk a bit about the full coverage we give, particularly GitHub comment monitoring, not just monitoring the code base, and then touch on how we remove bottlenecks from the approval flow. So, Gideon and Sam. Oh, and one final thing. The one area that could get a bit confusing here, there's two parts of the experience using Woodchip. There's the OSPO manager experience, which is the GUI, you know, SaaS-based tool, graphical user interface you see over here. Then there's the developer experience, and everything Gideon's going to show you will be command line based within VS Code. So Gideon will signpost which one he's talking about, but he's going to play two roles, the OSPO head and then the developer. Okay, so let's hand over there, Gideon. I'm going to stop my screen share.
Okay, let me share my screen real quick.
Thanks, Nick. So as Gideon's getting set up, I'll just reintroduce myself, Sam Morehouse, the CEO of Turntable. And as you've heard from Nick, some of the conversations that we've been having in the space about the frustrations that people have felt when they're making contributions to open source projects. So as Nick said, Gideon's gonna drive today, and I'm gonna navigate. But there are two Gideons. Gideon's wearing two hats. And the first hat is that of the OSPO head inside an organization. And what Gideon wants to achieve now is simple, clear management of the rules of the road around the kind of contributions that his developers can make. And so as you can see here, I'm not going to give you a laundry list of features, but you can see a bunch of our configuration options here, all the way from configuration about the developer's GitHub account. Lots of organizations say that an engineer ought to have a GitHub account with the email address on the account set to their work email address. Simple. We can make sure that those user accounts have that. Or as another example, we can require that all of our engineers' GitHub accounts have two-factor authentication enabled. We can give you a whitelist. We can allow you to provide a whitelist of project licenses from the open source license list to make sure that you can do effective license management in your organization. We can also set rules around the contributions themselves. And that's what Gideon's going to do today. He's going to set up a couple of simple rules, one of which to make sure that users cannot accidentally upload CSV files to GitHub. There we go. And one to make sure that Gideon can't upload any files that contain passwords or things that look like passwords. Fairly simple examples. The screen's clear. That provides a lot of clarity and visibility into the rules that are already set, and applying those rules is as simple as hitting that green button. So that's done now. Thanks, Gideon. So Gideon's now going to take off his administrator hat and put on his coding beanie. And Gideon's going to go into the space that he's most comfortable, which is inside VS Code, cutting code on a Java application. So here you can see demo application with some really valuable production code here, which determines if a number is even, and then does some tests to make sure that it is. Gideon's going to do what he does dozens of times every day, which is that mantra we all know: git add, git commit, and git push. So nothing's changed to Gideon's workflow. But as we're about to see, Woodchip steps in and shows us that there's been a problem, right? So our goal is that 99% of the time, your engineers barely know that Woodchip is even doing all of the complex and heavy lifting that it does. But when you have a problem, when you've done something wrong, either accidentally wrong or maybe a little bit malicious, Woodchip's going to show you, it's going to step in, it's going to block that issue. So that the issue here was that a restricted file type was found in the upload. So we get the details of the file, and we also get the opportunity to click on a link, which we'll do later. So we can show you more details of that problem in our web UI. So let's just have a quick look at transactions.csv to see what it is that we accidentally tried to push to GitHub. Remember, please, that once data is on GitHub, it's part of the Git hash chain, and it cannot be effectively removed. It cannot be effectively deleted, because people might have automated tooling set up on push, on merge, on commit to go and grab those commits. And so if we'd allowed this data to escape from our organization, it could be potentially disastrous to learn that Gideon lives in Accra and that John Doe lives in Lagos. So Gideon's going to be a good boy. He's going to delete that file. And then he's going to do the same thing again, repeat that mantra: git add, git commit, git push, so that we all do dozens of times a day. There's nothing new here. There's no Woodchip command line tooling that we're asking Gideon to use. We're not asking him to add another step in his contribution workflow. It's all tools that he's used in the past. And then there's another problem. Oh no, this is bad news. A failure of the demo gods. But no, wait. What Woodchip's found is that there is secret information found in a file called env. So if we can go and have a look at that, we'll see again that Gideon's tried to upload his env file to GitHub. And he shouldn't do that. That env file should be in a git ignore file, or he should have his own personal env file, which gets merged in his local environment when he starts his application locally. So again, we'll just delete that, get rid of that. His secret password is for him alone. So hopefully now we're on the happy path. We've shown you a couple of rules, simple rules that we can set up, and we've shown you the developer workflow, which 99% of the time is seamless. So Gideon's going to do git push origin master, and then drum roll, please. Absolutely. So this is where we all hope to be, right? This is the happy place. If we go back now to Gideon's dashboard, maybe we can see the details of some of these contributions. So this is Gideon's personal developer dashboard, which shows you his contributions using Woodchip over time, and shows you the successes and failures in the pushes that he's made. And we can see there a couple of those failures. They're going to be the most recent ones that we've just shown you in the demo. And the first is going to be, if we just go to logs there, it's going to show us the details of that failure, and that was secret information found in the env file. You can see the details here of the commit. The commit hash is up there. It was a push from Gideon, and that was attempted to commit to the master branch and some upstream. And if we go on the left side there, you can see the workflow that that Woodchip went through, and all of the different rules that were configured and that were applied, and you can see where the fail step was. So by this time, we passed the file type restriction test. We'd asserted that Gideon's code contains no profanity. We've got a list of swear words, and we've failed at the final hurdle, which was that end file which contained the password information. So that's Gideon's developer dashboard. What I want to show you now is if we just return to Gideon as the OSPO lead and he can put on his administrator hat, what happens if developers in an organization want to start contributing to a new open source project? And so there we're going to show you the simple add workspace workflow. So this is when you as an administrator start to get lots of upward pressure from engineers. Either, as Nick has said, they want to upstream a patch, or they've built a new feature for a library that they think is externally usable, or they've built a library or a framework or a tool themselves that they want to open source. And so this is the screen where you're going to enable them to do that. And so Gideon's going to add repository, and then we're going to be a little bit cheeky and see if we can allow turntable engineers to start working on the Git proxy code base. You can see here the Woodchip new project dashboard for Git proxy, which is going to show you a bunch of vital statistics for the project itself that we glean from GitHub. We're going to go and get the OpenSSF score, which will show you some security questions about the project itself. And we're going to, as you can see, we're doing some widespread analysis of the conversations that are going on in that Git proxy project. So we're aware not just of code concerns and contribution workflow concerns. We're aware not just of the license of the project and the nature of the user's GitHub account, but we're also starting to look at the nature and the tenor of conversations that happen on those GitHub issue comments. We know from experience and from our conversations with users and clients that they're really, really concerned about their engineers engaging on the public internet on behalf of their organizations with people in these open source comment threads. As we know, they can get a little heated. Sometimes they can get a little political, and we really, really want to make you aware of that so you can assess the risks for yourselves. If we click Add to Workspace, then that's it. Now Gideon's developers can start to be engineers on the Git proxy project. They can start to do git add, git commit, and git push, and there it is. So you can see this takes us full circle to a Git workflow that your users are very experienced with, very used to, and perfectly happy with. So this is the command line that they will use to start working on the Git proxy project from within your organization. So that was our demo. Thanks to Gideon, and thanks to folks for listening along. I'm going to hand back to Nick now. He's just going to tie things off, and then we'll have time for questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Really good to see that demo. Okay, well, just to wrap things up before questions, what did we just see? Well, we saw the easy SaaS setup of the complexity that underlies this, right? So rather than having a very long text file to configure things like two-factor authentication is required, or this project's allowed, or this isn't, what we've done with Woodchip is put all of that into a UI. So it's just clickable. So you're saving a huge amount of time with that. The word we kept hearing again and again as we were going out doing customer research at the beginning of this year was full audit trail. So the people with whom the buck stops when launching open source programs are saying, look, I just want everything covering. And we've all been there in big companies. We want that full audit trail because we don't know the extent of what we want coverage for, right? It's like, we don't know what all the risk is. Therefore, we want to know everything that's going on. And that's what you just saw, right? Where all of those Git interactions that Gideon was doing, the successful ones, the not successful ones, they're all captured in one place. And you could have thousands of developers in there and it would all be captured. We saw the automation of compliance. So when Gideon is going about things normally with no compliance issues, no one is bothered. It's logged, so you've got the audit trail, but it doesn't stop his workflow. And it doesn't mean the OSPO manager has to do anything, right? They just go about business as usual. They're only flagged when there's a problem. And, you know, extremely developer friendly, as Sam was sort of highlighting, fits into the very familiar workflows that developers have, both with GitHub and also with the command line tools. So, you know, the final thing for me to say today before I hand over for questions is we'd love you to join us on our journey. You know, we're very much at the beginning here with Woodchip. We have launched the product. We have a number of pilot customers working with us. So we're inviting you to come and join us. We'd love to get, you know, particularly if you're launching these projects, if you're struggling to sort of get this compliance going today, if you've tried some different solutions and they're not quite working for you, we're looking for some partners who we can work with to give you the solution you need, and we can get you up and running in days, but also to influence our roadmap, right? I mean, I've launched quite a lot of products, and the best way of doing it, I find, is to work with a group of partners who will share very openly what they like about the product, what they don't like about it, because there's always room for improvement, and really create a shared roadmap. So that's what we're here to do. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome to answer questions here. If you snap this QR code, where you go to is a form that just asks you a few basic questions. If you fill out that form, we'll get back to you. We'd love to be helping you deploy Woodchip and have you shape our roadmap. So that's all from the presentation today. I'd love to take any questions you've got now.
And just a reminder to everyone that you can please utilize the Q&A section. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type those now, and we are officially in the Q&A session. A question from myself. You talked a little bit about how end developers are generally going to be unaware of Woodchip's existence, kind of like until they need it. So we've seen this other open source tools or other developer tools that members in our community use, that sometimes they're unfortunately very aware of the developer tools presence for good and sometimes often very bad. Can you talk a little bit about some of the design and UX, either research or thought process that went into like making an unobtrusive tool that's there when you need it, but not that the end developer might not be aware of?
Yeah. Do you want to jump on that, Sam?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Carl. And I'm smiling because it was many sleepless nights of me and Gideon hacking on the Git binary to figure out the Git protocol so that we could be unobtrusive in our scanning. We did a bunch of work. There's a whole bunch of code in Git proxy that tears apart the binary data of a Git commit in flight. And we did our own work on hacking and unpacking that to figure out the Git protocol. But I think that's only half of it. I mean, I think the mindset is so important, and I think the reason why a tool like Woodchip and Git proxy is so effective is because we're engineers who have built engineering tools for engineers. I think the crucial thing there is that we know that the happy path, the developer contribution path, ought to be seamless. And the reason is because we have to compare it with the ways that engineers in highly regulated environments make contributions to open source projects now. So my own story, I started out in the mid-2000s working at Morgan Stanley. And I had colleagues who used open source libraries and who patched those libraries. It's a very, very common pattern of making a patch to an open source library so that it works inside your organization, so that it works in your environment, right? Might be as simple as a couple of lines. And ideally, you want to upstream that patch so that you don't have to keep reapplying it every time a new version comes down the pipe, right? But the legal and compliance and approval mechanisms involved in doing that are so onerous that either you don't bother and you just waste developer time making that patch over and over again, or as Nick said, people find workarounds. And I don't think we went into details of the kind of workarounds that we know people are making. We've spoken to dozens of folks in the field who, they might, with a nod and a wink, work from home one afternoon, right? I've got a bit of a toothache. I'm going to go. I'll just go home, and then they make the patch from their home environment. And that's a challenge, right? Because it means that as a leader, you have no oversight at all into contributions that your engineers are making on your time and on your dime? Or sometimes, as Nick said, what do we mean when we say manual approvals? Is we've had folks who are engineering leads, like Gideon is, and who have engineers coming to them and emailing them code and saying, can I commit this to the Finos Git proxy project? Or emailing a comment and saying, I want to add this comment to this issue comment thread, which is just an awful way to use manager time, and it's an awful approval mechanism. Or even worse, sometimes your IT security people say, well, look, we simply cannot have project governance around contributions because we don't have the tooling for that. So what we'll do is we'll give you a blessed laptop that one engineer can use at a time that will poke a hole through the firewall. And it's this kind of challenge that I've faced, and I know that a bunch of the people in the call have faced as engineers. And that's not even to begin talking about the sleepless nights that poor governance folks must have, right? How do I enable my developers to develop? How do I enable my developer community to engage effectively with the open source projects that they're using to build line of business applications on? Because I want to. As Nick has said, open source is like, engineers want to work on open source projects, but there's always been this kind of balance of open source versus corporate, open source versus corporate. So how do I use my engineers and enable them to do the job that they want to do? And that's what we hope a tool like Woodchip is for. Well,
and even outside of open source, the amount of developer tools that I've worked on, I've been on the team where I worked at a compliant messaging service that that many people on this call are familiar with. And, we had to focus so much on UI, UX, and design because you don't want people having, what's the point in having a compliant ecosystem if people are bypassing the ecosystem because of bad design? Then you don't have a compliant ecosystem anymore. Which is of utmost importance to our community.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on the exact problem we're trying to solve, right? It's a very, very good analogy. It's not good enough just to say, yes, that alternative that's compliant and secure is there. You have to make it the best solution, not an alternative one. And that's what we've been focused on.
Well, it's one of these funny paradoxes is everyone says they want security and compliance, but the moment an end user has the opportunity, if they a trade-off between design and compliance, they're going to choose design almost every time. And that's backed by a lot of industry research on this.
Yes.
We have a quick question from the community. So we've seen it working using the CLI, but how does Woodchip work if someone's using the GitHub web UI?
The GitHub web UI to make contributions to projects isn't part of our workflow because that's GitHub to GitHub. And the way that Git proxy works is as a proxy that you configure in your developer environment to redirect contributions. So the context of Woodchip is in a highly regulated environment where contributions must be made locally. And we haven't seen a use case when we've been working with our clients for using the GitHub web UI. In fact, what most organizations do is either block GitHub or block select pages within GitHub.
Got it.
That's a great question.
And reminder to everyone, any more questions, please put them in the QA. Otherwise, I'm going to ask a couple more of my own, and maybe we'll end early. But please continue asking us questions. Another question from my side. So now that we're looking at this join us on our journey side, so maybe this fits into shape the roadmap, but is there kind of other levels of, or kind of success stories or kind of preferred ways of engagement that, like, if I'm a developer and I want to contribute to kind of core Git proxy and build a nice relationship for what ends up in the deployed product, like, is there a way that developers can kind of engage in the roadmap by direct contribution, and kind of like how would that work with between teams?
Absolutely. I can talk a little bit about that. I think the relationship between Woodchip and Git proxy, from my perspective, and we maintain really good relationships with the leaders of the Git proxy team, is pretty positive. So as a team, we've made sure that we've upstreamed many of the contributions that we've made, the work that we've done on Woodchip, to the Git proxy project, and we've made turntable engineers available to Git proxy to build out new features and new parts of the platform. And I think that works out really, really well. So yeah, on the one hand, Woodchip is another example of that time-honored tradition of a commercial version of an open source tool. And I like to see that Finos supports that model. I think it's really important for the open source world that there's money swimming around and paid contributions being made. I think that's something that Finos has shown works really, really well. And on the other hand, absolutely. Look, I mean, like all Finos projects, Git proxy is looking for more engineers and more developers. And you can join our team and the Git proxy team in building out new features. There are regular hackathons and there are regular architectural changes to Git proxy, which are always really, really good. So definitely do join the development team and start contributing your code.
I'll also say, just as a quick kind of follow up on that, we saw some really exciting stuff in the City Hackathon in that was India regionally focused in October. We ended up seeing a number of people who participated in the hackathon, ended up working on some kind of Git proxy issues, both to participate in the hackathon and as well as part of their solution, who then became Git proxy. We saw some people who started in October who have been very active since, and we sorry, I think I froze there a little bit. We believe that they came in through the hackathon. So there's kind of all different entryways to join in the community and become active members and get your voice heard or your code heard. So another question that we have here is, so how can we define and enforce granular compliance policies outside of kind of like bulk upload or like CSV uploads through the UI?
Yeah, I guess the question is what kind of granularity are we talking about? So like one axis of granularity is per organization versus per project. And we're looking to build out per project permissions. But it's not something that's come from our users. And so we're being very, very user driven in how we build out new features. I think that, with the best will in the world, a lot of engineers go out and build a product that they think is the right one. Really, really trying to be very, very product focused and very user focused as we build out new features. So what does that allow us to do? There are three kind of axes of rules that we've built out. One is around the contribution itself. So as a proxy tool that sits in between the developer's workflow and GitHub, we can see push by push the code changes that are going out. In fact, we can see pulls as well. One of the bits of extensibility that we added with Woodchip is pull filtering, which allows us to have some notion of what code is coming into your organization as well. So I'm going to start to build out more and more tooling there, vulnerability detection, an analysis of incoming code too, so you can have some control of changes that your developers haven't made. So one is the contribution. One is the engineer's GitHub account. And so we can look at all of the contributions that your engineers make, not just the ones to the projects that you've approved. And so as you and Nick were discussing earlier, we can actually see sometimes engineers do a little end run around the system by accident, by design, by laziness. And so we're able to send just a gentle nudge in the right direction. Hey, it looks like you haven't set up Woodchip for this contribution. You might want to look at. Here's how you can do that setup, which at an enterprise level is crucial, and also just completes the picture of that audit, log that you really need. And then the third axis of rule is around the project itself. And so organizations, enterprises want to ensure that the projects that their developers are contributing to have the right license, for example. They might want to check the validity or some of the background behind some of the project administrators or some of the projects that those administrators have worked on, alongside this project, so they can do kind of reputational analysis. So those are the three areas of contribution rules that we've set up currently.
Excellent, thank you. And so we have time for like one or two more questions, I think. So good. We just got another anonymous attendee asking a question, and I'm going to ask a follow-up to it because it was related to one of the questions I was going to ask. How does Woodchip determine whether a commit message contains profane words? How will it manage profane words spoken in other native languages? Particularly if developers come from, might have like dialects or countries with multiple languages. And I would say related to that is, how do you kind of extending that? How do you also kind of look at compliance policies and IP leakages? Like what are the mechanisms that power those all behind the scene?
Awesome. Yeah. So I think the profanity question is a fun one, and there's a simple glib answer, and there's a longer and more complex answer. Simple glib answer is that we've got lots of young engineers that speak Twee at Turntable, and so we can get them to write a list of swear words in Twee. I mean, cross language functionality is either a simple question of just extending a word list, or a more complex question of what we're trying to get to the bottom of isn't just people using swear words. It's what's the intent behind folks' messages, right? There are classic problems even in the English language around determining if someone's actually using a swear word, or if they're using a word which contains a swear word, right? The profanity isn't the point, the message is the point. The code that we have at the moment uses a word list, but the obvious extensibility is using AI tooling there to determine not just what words people are using, but what do they mean when they're writing their commit messages, and what do they mean when they're writing their comments, and how will those things be interpreted? And I think one of the reasons we're in a really exciting time right now is because language models can help us determine those things over and above what 10 years ago you and I might have called sentiment analysis. Right. So that's.
Oh, sorry, please.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to say, even, and I in my college, one of my thesis group mates did a large thing on sentiment analysis in localized Arabic, which was ended up being this like very nuanced and mathematically complex and like extreme levels of training data to kind of build like corpuses of training data across multiple dialects. I remember being this like really hard problem, but somewhere in the middle of that is also just like series of regex. So like even just like looking at like, is an IP here, or is this an API key, or is this is a social security number, or some other PII coming out that I've seen in other compliance tools. Do you utilize any kind of like corpus of various like compliance regex, or is it somewhere between the list of word lists and AI?
Yeah, and those regex lists they're open source as well, so those things are widely available. So I think that's a very simple first pass for a tool like this. I think that any DLP tooling has to have a regex list of, like Gideon's example of password, right? Or secret key, or there's long lists of all of the potential secret key environment variables that are contained. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's a wide open field of AI tooling that can look at what the code is actually doing. And one of the really exciting spaces right now is, I've got on my bookshelf, there's two things. One, there's a book called Artificial Intelligence: A Modern Approach, which when I was at university way back in like the 18th century was the canonical textbook. It's called Russell and Norvig for AI. And I was reading the last few pages yesterday as it happens, and they were discussing, Russell and Norvig were discussing the idea that computers might one day be able to understand what a piece of text means. And we can do that now, right? So we can start to look at, we can take a Git diff and we can eyeball it, but then we can go to GitHub and say, well, give us a bit more context up and down from where this diff is, which we do. And then we can say, well, what's the nature of this change? Is this a configuration change? Is this code motion? Is this new functionality? Is this suspicious? How suspicious is it? And that's obviously a very exciting place for us to be.
Well, and I guess I'll give a quick pitch for some other things that are happening in the Finos ecosystem on this space, and then which will lead into the last question here. They're very closely related, and then we'll hand over to Neve for some maybe some last announcements and get wrapped up here and with some closing thoughts. So there's for those who don't know, there's a lot of ongoing work with we've got the AI governance framework. We've got the AI governance framework, and there's a lot of efforts to make machine readability between governance frameworks, regulation frameworks into machine readable code. And so the thesis of a lot of this work is that it's going to help with kind of the automated compliance, or allowing an LLM to say, is this architecture deployment, if it's written in architecture as code or COM, compliant with the governance framework? Or is the business logic as code that might be used in Morphere or Open Reg Tech, like, is the code generated now compliant? So like adding an LLM as judge is the term that we've been hearing, that are like fine-tuned on these models or on these like X as code representation of governance, regulation, business logic, even CI/CD pipelines as code is some of the things that we've been hearing, or data as code. We've also been doing other works on, taking advantage of the like CDM, the common domain model under Finos, and we've been fine-tuning models on that, which we have an idea that there will be a LLM agent as judge that might be utilizable and fit very well in a Woodchip Git proxy ecosystem. And that's something that could be done in the open that Woodchip wouldn't necessarily have to specialize in, but Woodchip could implement as I don't want to say SaaS, as a service built into the solution. So, and then I guess that ties into the question that we have from the Q&A. Is there a plan for Woodchip to analyze regulations on behalf of organizations down the line, or will orgs always be responsible for setting compliance thresholds? And I'd say that there's a third option is, or can it be done in the open?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting space. So the Git proxy project actually came out of City, which is another a major sponsor of Finos and a major contributor to code and the community, right? Yeah, absolutely. And one of the like key pieces there was some work that Ridian Olds did to build up City's governance rules for making open source contributions. And they actually open sourced that work. So you can go onto the City developer website and you can see the rules of the road that they have set for their own engineers to make contributions to the open source world. Now, as folks in policy land know, the governance rules are only one side of the coin. They have to be backed by technology controls. And that's where Git proxy came from. So Git proxy is the tool that allows those engineers and those leaders at City to literally encode the rules that they've defined themselves, talking with senior technology leadership, talking with IT security, talking with legal and compliance, and bringing all of those parts of the organization together so that conversation happens once and is ongoing as necessary, but it doesn't happen at the time of the individual developer contribution.
Yeah.
And that's the bottleneck that we're trying to get rid of, right?
And one of the terms that I've been hearing emerge in the Finos community for this is, instead of talking about all these different policies, we're referring to them all arbitrarily as rule sets. So things that are often plain text, but are they regulation? Are they governance? Are they policies? Are they business logic requirements? And then being able to map those things to what the code is actually doing and figuring out how to, is it compliant with any number of these arbitrary rule sets? So I think people are thinking about this in a control space, and thinking about it in the control space or the regulation space is useful and necessary. But at some point, the things that LLMs unlock is the ability to look at a much wider ability of rules potentially.
And the opportunity here, you're absolutely right. And the opportunity here is that the models themselves don't need to be general purpose, because we're talking about a very specific domain, which is financial services, with incredibly well-defined rules, and actually a fairly small population of implementers. And so the LLM tooling can be very specific in terms of even things like error messages. It doesn't have to be general purpose. This model isn't valid. We can say why. Very cool.
Oh, and which has massive implications for cost of implementation. I talked to someone at one of the data pipeline providers, and they said that in talking about the smallest model for the smallest task, if you train a model on hundreds of thousands of parameters versus millions or billions of parameters, you're literally talking about cents on the dollar in terms of training and usage. Which, you know, and I think would be interesting to our membership in figuring that out from an economics perspective. Cool. We are at the last couple minutes here. So big round of applause from the Finos side on big thank you for Turntable for the presentation today and for all that you do and have done and will continue to do. Wide throughout the community. Highly recommend it. People also check out the work that Turntable has done on in TraderX. We've got a great issue on morpherizing TraderX components, and I believe we'll be seeing some presentations at OSFF on some of the work from COM, which is one of my favorite projects, and very related to everything we talked about in the last 5 minutes. Actually, both of those contributions are really relevant to that. This has been the Open Source in Finance webinar series. This, as a reminder, this is a member benefit. So if you are a Finos member, and you would like to take advantage, please contact myself or our Finos marketing team, and we will be happy to begin the discussion about getting your team on our calendar. We have one additional question from YouTube. Neve, do you have that question, or can you ask that question?
Yeah, of course. So it's from Darnell. Darnell had asked, could blockchain help automate or secure open source license tracking for banks?
The issue, so potentially, right? But we're not in the blockchain space. I think we're in the GitHub space, and GitHub isn't a blockchain, and won't be. So I think the answer is potentially, but in a different space.
I have worked in the blockchain space, and I would firmly echo that that answer. Cool. And so with that, big round of applause and thank you again to all of our presenters and the Turntable team. A reminder that May 7th, we have a very exciting, another very exciting talk. We've got Sonatype and NVIDIA will be co-presenting, and we'll have a little bit of a change in format a little bit. It'll be a little bit more of a roundtable Q&A with some, it'll be more of the discussion we had here the last couple of minutes as opposed to exactly a presentation. And the registration link has been posted in the Zoom chat for everyone. So with that, big thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you to our presenters, and we look forward to seeing you on the next project.